What if I told you Brazil's decision to trade oil with Russia in local currencies could trigger the biggest shift in global finance since 1971? This seemingly regional trade agreement between two BRICS nations is sending shockwaves through Washington's corridors of power. In the next few minutes, we'll analyze how this unprecedented move could potentially accelerate de-dollarization across the global south and reshape the international monetary system. The ramifications extend far beyond just Brazil and Russia, potentially affecting your investments, the price of goods, and the future economic standing of the United States. So what exactly happens when Brazil trades oil with Russia using their own currencies instead of the US dollar? The technical machinery behind this arrangement reveals a sophisticated financial blueprint that fundamentally alters decades of established practice in global oil markets. Let's examine the actual mechanics. Brazil and Russia have established what economists call a bilateral currency swap arrangement. This means the Brazilian central bank and the Russian central bank have created special accounts for each other, allowing direct exchange of Brazilian reals for Russian rubles without first converting to US dollars. When a Brazilian oil company purchases crude from Russia, payment flows directly between these two accounts, eliminating the traditional dollar-denominated settlement process that has been standard since the 1970s Bretton Woods collapse. The banking infrastructure supporting this arrangement is particularly noteworthy. Both countries have established dedicated clearinghouses specifically designed to process these transactions. With encrypted communication channels that operate independently from the SWIFT system, traditionally dominated by Western financial institutions. These clearinghouses perform currency conversion at rates determined directly by their central banks rather than using market-based dollar exchange rates, effectively creating a parallel financial ecosystem. This arrangement carries profound implications for international oil trading. Since 1974, when the United States and Saudi Arabia established the Petrodollar system, virtually all global oil transactions have been conducted in US dollars. This practice has created constant global demand for American currency and allowed the US to run persistent trade deficits without typical economic consequences. Brazil's move represents one of the most significant challenges to this system by a major economy in decades. The volume of trade between these nations makes this shift particularly consequential. Previously, Brazil-Russia oil trade averaged approximately $5.3 billion annually, all processed through dollar-denominated channels. Under the new arrangement, projections indicate this figure could increase to nearly $8.7 billion within 18 months, representing a 64% growth in bilateral energy commerce. This expansion stems primarily from reduced transaction costs and the elimination of currency conversion fees that previously added 3 to 5% to every purchase. What specific products are changing hands? Brazil is now purchasing primarily high-grade diesel fuel, jet fuel, and specialized petroleum derivatives from Russia instead of traditional US suppliers. Comparative pricing reveals these products are currently available at 7 to 12% below American market rates, creating immediate cost advantages for Brazilian industries and transportation sectors. Additionally, Russia has offered preferential access to its advanced oil refinery technologies, previously unavailable to Brazil due to technological transfer restrictions. Perhaps most significantly, this arrangement effectively neutralizes US sanctions against Russia's energy sector. While American restrictions prohibit dollar-based transactions with major Russian oil companies, they cannot prevent payments processed entirely in local currencies through sovereign banking systems. This creates a template for circumventing Western financial restrictions that other nations under similar constraints might follow. The economic benefits for both nations extend beyond mere sanction evasion. Brazil gains access to discounted energy products while diversifying its supply chains away from historical dependence on American producers. Russia secures a stable market for its petroleum exports at a time when European purchases have declined significantly. Both nations reduce their exposure to dollar exchange rate fluctuations and gain greater monetary sovereignty. The technical implementation involves substantial changes to operational procedures. Trade ministers from both countries have established standardized documentation requirements, verification protocols, and dispute resolution mechanisms specific to these non-dollar transactions. Banking personnel have undergone specialized training in processing these novel payment flows, and both governments have created dedicated oversight committees to monitor compliance with the new framework. As the technical implementation of Brazil and Russia's currency agreement takes shape, the reactions from other BRICS nations tell a revealing story about the bloc's internal dynamics. While Brazil and Russia forge ahead with their new financial framework, the response from other BRICS nations has been anything but uniform. Could the world's most powerful emerging economies be divided on what many expected would be their unified economic strategy against dollar dominance? China's reaction has been particularly nuanced. Despite years of rhetoric about reducing dollar dependence, Beijing has adopted a surprisingly cautious approach to Brazil's initiative. Chinese officials have expressed support in principle, but their actions suggest a more measured stance. This hesitation stems largely from China's complex relationship with its own financial markets. As economist Gian Maria Milesi Ferretti observes, China remains reluctant to relinquish control over its economy and financial markets, despite gradually opening them to international participation. The world's second-largest economy appears to be calculating that while de-dollarization serves its long-term strategic interests, rushing into similar arrangements might introduce unwanted volatility into its carefully managed economic system. India's position reflects its unique geopolitical balancing act. While maintaining historically strong ties with Russia, India also nurtures an increasingly important strategic relationship with the United States. This dual orientation has led to a carefully calibrated response to Brazil's currency shift. Rather than immediately emulating the Brazil-Russia model, India has pursued its own path, notably through an agreement with the United Arab Emirates to explore pricing oil in rupees. This approach allows India to advance its currency internationalization goals while maintaining flexibility in its great power relationships. The measured nature of India's response highlights how economic decisions in the BRICS bloc remain firmly tethered to broader strategic considerations. Perhaps the most surprising reaction has come from Saudi Arabia, the newest BRICS member and historically the cornerstone of the petrodollar system. Since the 1970s, Saudi Arabia has worked with the United States to ensure oil is priced in dollars, creating enduring global demand for American currency. Yet recent signals suggest a potential shift in Riyadh's position. Saudi officials have shown unexpected receptiveness to alternative currency arrangements, including discussions with China about pricing oil in renminbi. This openness represents a significant evolution in Saudi economic thinking and raises profound questions about the future stability of the petrodollar system that has underpinned American economic power for half a century. Evidence indicates that while public reactions vary, behind-the-scenes preparations for similar bilateral currency agreements are accelerating across the BRICS membership. China continues to pursue a deal for oil in renminbi with Saudi Arabia, while India's agreement with the UAE demonstrates concrete progress toward rupee-based oil pricing. These developments suggest that rather than a coordinated bloc-wide approach, what's emerging is a network of bilateral arrangements tailored to each country's specific economic and political circumstances. The question now becomes, which BRICS nation might next announce a similar currency arrangement? Economic indicators and recent official statements point to several possibilities. South Africa has expressed interest in expanding rand-based trade, while Egypt and Ethiopia, as BRICS aspirants, have signaled openness to local currency arrangements. The most consequential move would be a formal China-Saudi Arabia agreement to conduct oil trade in renminbi, which would represent a seismic shift in the global currency landscape. As option 3 from the Curiosity Gap suggests, Washington's response to the Brazil-Russia currency agreement presents a strategic dilemma with far-reaching implications. The tools available to defend dollar hegemony span a spectrum from subtle economic incentives to punitive measures. Yet deploying either approach carries risks that could inadvertently accelerate the very de-dollarization process the United States aims to prevent. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's recent statements reflect this cautious approach, characterizing Brazil's actions as expected market evolution, while simultaneously emphasizing that the dollar's global position remains secure due to America's economic fundamentals. This measured tone contrasts sharply with internal assessments at the Treasury Department, where classified briefings have reportedly described the Brazil-Russia arrangement as a concerning precedent that requires vigilant monitoring. The State Department has taken a firmer stance, with diplomatic cables sent to U.S. embassies in key BRICS nations, instructing ambassadors to emphasize the inherent risks and inefficiencies of local currency arrangements. Meanwhile, White House economic advisors have publicly downplayed the significance of the deal, calling it symbolic rather than systemic in its immediate impact. This calculated ambivalence mirrors how the United States has historically responded to challenges to dollar supremacy. When France, under President de Gaulle, began converting dollar reserves to gold in the 1960s, threatening the Bretton Woods system, the U.S. initially dismissed concerns before ultimately abandoning the gold standard entirely. More recently, when Iran attempted to establish an oil bourse trading in euros in 2008, the U.S. response escalated from dismissive statements to intensified sanctions enforcement through secondary banking penalties. The economic arsenal available to Washington remains formidable. The Federal Reserve could adjust interest rate policies to enhance dollar attractiveness, though such moves would need to balance currency concerns against domestic economic priorities. The Treasury maintains the ability to provide exceptional dollar liquidity through swap lines with select central banks, creating powerful incentives for continued dollar usage. Most potently, the U.S. can deploy its sanctions architecture, which has been significantly enhanced since 2001, targeting financial institutions that facilitate non-dollar oil transactions deemed counter to American interests. Within policy circles, a remarkable divergence has emerged regarding dollar hegemony's value to the American economy. Traditionalists maintain that the dollar's reserve status represents an exorbitant privilege, providing low borrowing costs and sanctions leverage. A growing contingent of economic advisors, however, argues that dollar dominance has contributed to persistent trade deficits and manufacturing sector erosion by keeping the currency artificially strong, making American exports less competitive globally. This policy divide reflects broader political fractures in Washington. National security hawks view the Brazil-Russia arrangement as part of a coordinated assault on American financial power requiring robust countermeasures. Economic pragmatists, meanwhile, see de-dollarization as an inevitable adjustment, reflecting changing global economic realities that the U.S. should manage rather than resist. These competing perspectives complicate the formulation of a coherent American response strategy. Should the Brazil-Russia model prove successful and begin expanding to other bilateral relationships, American countermeasures might include enhanced foreign exchange market interventions, revision of sanctions enforcement guidelines, or even the development of a digital dollar to address efficiency concerns that motivate countries to explore alternatives. Each option carries significant implementation challenges and potential unintended consequences. The Federal Reserve's recent establishment of a specialized monitoring group focused on international payment system evolutions suggests preparation for a more fragmented currency landscape, while Treasury's expanded engagement with Saudi Arabia, offering enhanced security guarantees and preferential investment opportunities, demonstrates efforts to preserve critical, dollar-based relationships. As the Brazil-Russia currency agreement unfolds, we are witnessing what may become the first substantial challenge to the dollar-based financial order established in 1971. This is not merely a bilateral arrangement, but potentially a template for restructuring global trade relationships. The fragmenting reserve landscape presents a complex economic equation. While diversification offers increased flexibility and reduced dependence on a single currency, it also introduces uncertainty and potentially higher transaction costs for international commerce. The fundamental question before us is whether this experiment represents an isolated case or the beginning of a profound shift in the international monetary system with lasting implications for American economic influence and global financial stability. This is the financial shock, but it all began when India shook up the tech world. If you missed that, go watch what Trump called the biggest tech betrayal of the century.